Hello YouTube, welcome back over to GamingHouse, and you are just in time for the lunch hour. Now, if you don't know what the lunch hour is, it's probably because I haven't been doing enough of them lately, and that's my bad. I keep getting distracted by things, but anyway. Lunch hour is essentially I talk about a video game or video game series, talk about each iteration, what I liked, didn't like about them, a brief synopsis of what they were about, and talk about what I'd like to have done in the future, if they plan to continue the series or not, or what I wish they would do if they continued it. Some examples, I talked about Ghost Recon, I believe I talked about Rainbow Six, I should have. And I've talked about, for a faraway example, The Thing, which is a game that probably anyone watching this has not played. Unless you're my age or older, and then I feel bad because you're my age or older. Now for this one I'm actually kind of excited about, because we're talking about a series that I've liked for a while now, and it's actually Gears of War. Kind of ironic because I primarily play on an Xbox, but besides the point, talking about all the Gears of War ones, even Gears of War Judgment, which I'm not excited to talk about at all. Kind of wish didn't exist, so that'll be fun when we actually get to it. Now the Gears of War series, for the most part, has been published by Microsoft and developed by Epic Games Studios, the people that created the Unreal Engine, Unreal Tournament, and a few others that no one knows or talks about anyway, because they're the big ones that anyone cares about. So Gears of War takes place on a planet called Serra. It's similar to Earth, actually has 26 hours in a day, I believe. And the funny thing about Serra is, of course, the Easter egg of the name is that it's Ares spelled backwards, which completely summarizes the planet, because the planet is always in a state of war. Someone is always fighting each other over something, whether it's resources, nation, boundaries. But recently, they just finished a war over emulsion, which is this kind of omnipotent fuel. It's great, it's amazing, it's abundant, so everyone just got done warring. I don't remember how long, and I'm terrible for it because I've read all the books and everything too. I believe it was 80 years or so, or longer, that the war has been waging between several nations until there's just two contenders left, which was the COG, the Coalition of Ordered Governments, and the UIR, the Union of Independent Republics. I could have gotten the UIR's name wrong, but at least I got the abbreviation right anyway. But the COG had finally succeeded in essentially beating the shit out of everyone else, particularly after they had developed or at least finished developing, the Hammer of Dawn project before anyone else could, which is essentially orbital lasers in space, which, that's what orbital means, but besides the point. They finished that, clean victory over practically everyone else, and finally Serra has a moment of peace. Unfortunately, that peace is quickly broken by the arrival of the Locust, a subterranean species that starts popping up from underground all over the place and essentially kicks everyone's ass because no one's expecting things to come up from underground and attack them. After pretty much being pushed into the corner of their own capital, Jacinto, which cannot be burrowed through because the granite and everything underneath it is actually really hard to dig through, they unleash the Hammer of Dawn system on a global scale, initially just enacting scorched earth everywhere. Pretty much anyone that couldn't get to Jacinto, they pretty much was a tough shit, you're out of luck scenario. So, as it turns out though, it was kind of almost all for nothing, simply delaying the Locust as they continued to onslaught against the remaining factions of humanity, which is the Coalition of Ordered Governments, whatever remained of them, from Jacinto and any neighboring cities that weren't really destroyed, as well as stranded. At least they are labeled stranded because they were left behind, which comprises of mostly civilians and other military that felt like they were backstabbed by their own government. And rightfully so. I mean, if you were left to be fried by a laser and left to fend for yourself, it'd be pretty shitty. Now, getting into Gears of War 1 finally, this takes place many years after the Hammer of Dawn strikes. The player 1 plays as Marcus Phoenix, who is now just being broken out of prison for defying orders and essentially costing the COG a major loss, at least as what they see as a major loss during the war with the Locust, as he disobeyed to go try and rescue his father, which was all for nothing because his father died. You can't see it, I'm doing quotation marks. But he is broken out by his best friend from childhood and his best bromigo around, Dominic Santiago, who will be controlled by player 2 in this instance if you are playing co-op at all in Gears of War. But he's broken out. He links up with Delta Squad, which consists of Kim and Carmine, who is the running gag of the series of always having his family essentially die, because he dies, Benjamin dies, and it's left to Clay to actually break the cycle, as well as rather the unknown instance of the fourth brother in the family. But they join up. They're told by Colonel Hoffman, or at least Kim is, that they are going on attempt a sensual last push effort. Well, not really a last push, but they're trying to detonate a bomb, or not really detonate one, but actually just launch one that's actually going to go underground and destroy most of the Locust homeworld. Now, along the way, they eventually gain two new teammates. Cole, who is a former thrashball, which is their version of essentially super steroided up football. He's a former star athlete of that sport, very charismatic and loved by the troops. And also Cole's best friend from his time in the military, Baird, who's very cynical and also the tech-savvy one of the entire group. Now, before diving into the sequels, let's essentially get into what made Gears. Now, Gears is a third-person cover shooter, and regarded by many to essentially be the best and or the staple for what a third-person shooter should be, especially if they have a cover system, as Gears is regarded to have one of the most smoothest cover systems out of any of the cover shooters out there. One of Gears' staples also is the amount of violence per se. Now, it's not entirely unjustified, as the planet, of course, is always in a state of war, everyone's fighting each other, but this game is particularly brutal in the sense that the main weapon is the Lancer, which is a assault rifle with a chainsaw at the bottom of it. And during grueling chainsaw death kills, you're able to curb stomp enemies that are downed. In general, very brutal and violent game, which I don't actually mind. I like. It's gritty. The setting of Gears of War 1 is very dark and gritty as well. Many people like the atmosphere of the campaign simply because of all the dark and grittiness about it. And the final hallmark of Gears is its multiplayer, which a fun fact about the multiplayer for Gears 1 is that it was actually just a last-minute tack on, and it quickly grew to kind of being one of the main features of the game itself. Now, of course, the multiplayer wasn't without some issues. Now, it's Gears versus Locust, and essentially, all the violence and everything's included as well, but its main issue was that its first one was heavily reliant on peer-to-peer and rather bad at it at that. Now, peer-to-peer is, of course, where one person is the host, and essentially they all go off through their connection. Now, if you didn't have a really great host, everyone but the host would generally suck at the game, and it's a heavy reliance on luck and whether or not your shots registered, whether or not they connected within time before you were killed, or if you're even against the host. In fact, a general rule of thumb is if you were a host, or anyone that had a good connection with hosts, that was the only time you could actually use your Lancer, the Hammerburst, and all that, because your shots were essentially not all registering, and the only effective weapon was the Gnasher. A guaranteed up-close kill, and all that, assuming how many pellets actually connected. Now, unfortunately, the mentality born from that, from this massive amount of luck and all that, gave Gears a very high amount of elite players, at least those that would consider them elite, where in multiplayer, if you weren't using the Gnasher, you were essentially a scrub. At least that's what you'd be called, and I recall several hate messages back in the day for not using the Lancer and all that, or not using the Gnasher, sorry. But it's essentially very focused on that. Power weapons were around the map. Those were also your huge difference makers. Now, let's get into Gears of War 2. Gears of War 2, again, has a more improvement. I believe they upgraded. This is when they upgraded engine, or at least they started to use more of it for the Unreal Engine. Gears of War 2 had a more of a lighter tone to it, or at least it wasn't as gritty and dark as the first Gears of War, as humanity, after the effect of the bombing on Locust, which they are still not done, by the way. They were a little affected, but they're still coming in hard. They pretty much want to now lead an all-out offensive on the Locust homeworld, considering they still didn't finish them off, but now they intend to lead an assault by drilling underground and dropping in a whole bunch of soldiers to hopefully cause a whole mass wipeout attack going on. It's rather confusing and doesn't make a whole lot of sense almost. But of course, you're back in the boots of Delta Squad, Marcus Phoenix, Cole, Baird, Dom, who's the guy I forgot there for a second, they're all back. You're in control of them. Still 2-player co-op for the campaign, as well as an addition of several secondary characters such as Dizzy, Ty, and I think that was actually it. I think I just listed them all. But there's a new bad guy afoot, a general leading the army, and the first one it was General Rom, this kind of big, hulking, tyrant-looking motherfucker. And this one you get his polar opposite, essentially, a rather skinny, fast locust called Scourge. I think. Scourge. Yeah, Scourge, not Scourge. It was Scourge. I'm right. A note I should follow for future videos is to probably fully research and not recall everything from memory. But anyway, the offensive is launched. It's not quite successful, as well as the locusts have recently been sinking cities somehow, and it's been revealed eventually to Delta Squad that they are using an ancient giant worm that has been underground that the locusts awakened, which is one of the running themes, is that they take natural creatures and turn them into weapons of war. But now, they gotta stop that. They also gotta stop the locusts from sinking Jacinto now, which they are attempting to do. Which, in the end, you end up actually sinking Jacinto yourself to flood the underground to kill the locust off before they can just sink the city themselves and evacuate. Now, new additions to the Gears of War franchise from Gears of War 2 was essentially a better attempt at eliminating host advantage, which they tried to do. It was a little bit better, but it was still obviously there. And for multiplayer, all your usual modes and everything were there that everyone loved. And we had the new addition for the co-op side, which is a 4-player Horde mode, which is again one of the, back before Horde modes were really popular, Gears had this occur. And of course it's called Horde mode. You last 50 waves, I think it was 50 waves back in the day too, of ever increasing difficulty enemies, and you finish it out, you get massive experience. It was a fun thing all around, at least it was for me. I enjoy co-op modes. Now, getting into Gears of War 3. This takes place a little while after Gears of War 2. If you hadn't read the books, which fill in a lot of the detail, they gave you a little intro video explaining what's been going on. Essentially, with their own safe haven destroyed, the COG have been wandering around, trying to figure out what to do, where to hide out, which they tried to visit an island. That didn't work out due to the appearance of a new foe, the Lambent, which you briefly saw in Gears of War 2. But were never seen again because they were attacking locusts, and it turns out that these guys have been attacking locusts the entire time and are now taking to the surface. They're weird glowing kind of creatures, all deformed and weird looking. And it is also at this point that the coalition of order governments is actually no more. Everyone's just kind of out fending for themselves. Prescott has abandoned everyone who was the leader, who was the chairman of the COG, which I forgot to name him in the Gears of War 2 part there. He's one of the new characters. But Hoffman and them have, at a certain segment, have left to go to an old military base to hide out at, while Marcus and everyone else has actually stayed with the Navy, which has convoluted their fleet together to kind of just float along, and they have a garden and everything. They've been trying to make a living just floating on the sea for a while. But out of nowhere, Prescott shows back up with a spanking new helicopter and everything, and has important information for the leader of Marcus's faction. But in the pursuing Lambent attack, Prescott's mortally injured, as well as the ship's captain is dead. But with the information, they retreated to find out that Adam Phoenix, Arx Phoenix's dad, who was thought to be dead the last 2 games, is actually alive and kept on a secret military base hidden off in the ocean. Now they set off, they go find Hoffman to help figure out the location of the base, and then eventually try to get to the base, which turns out that the Lambent are actually a result from the emulsion that they've been using all this time, which actually, while being a fuel source, was actually a microorganism and also parasitic in nature, as lately actually humans have been turning into Lambent themselves. But leaving most of the spoilers out, they essentially get theirs a super weapon that gets activated and all that, and then the Gears of War series actually comes to an end, with the Locust and Lambent all pretty much killed off. Now on the multiplayer side of things, start off with Horde mode, because I love Horde mode, of course. Horde mode got a whole new revamp. You're able to actually buy and set up defenses now. You're able to buy other equipment and weapons. Each round is instanced. You could be fighting just Locust in one round, or just Lambent, or an actual mix of both, which if they're actually left alone and don't fight too far, will actually fight each other. And of course, each wave gets increasingly difficult, with the 10th wave in each one being a boss battle between either, say, a bunch of Lambent bosses, or Locust ones such as a Berserker, and all that. Also, on the multiplayer side of things, we have plenty of characters to pick from now. Weapons had their own skins, that some of which can be earned, others had to be bought or were promotional, or awards from playing the previous games. And also, on the Versus side of things, this was the best one in the series. It felt the smoothest compared to the other ones. Host advantage was very minimal. And usually when I talk about Gears of War, I like to say that they're a solid progression of what a series should be. Each iteration got better with each game, got smoother, had a story that got progressively longer, weapons, executions, everything was stacking up correctly. And then we get Gears of War Judgment. Now, Gears of War Judgment was actually, I believe, still published by Microsoft and also Epic Games this time around, which helped out a little bit with development, but development was mostly handed off to people who can fly, who are owned by Epic. They did Bulletstorm as well, which I think was their only other big game under their name. Now, Judgment is actually more of a prequel to the series. It takes place during the whole initial Locust attack, not the initial Locust attack, but a little while after the Hammer of Dawn strikes occurred. And you are with Baird, who is the lieutenant, apparently, which I don't recall actually ever reading in the books, and Cole, who is now insanely tiny. As you can see, my immersion with that one was actually broken. I never actually played Judgment, because I didn't want to, because I didn't like what it looked. They switched up controls around a little bit. The multiplayer was actually human versus human, which I don't know why they did. Several key game modes were removed. Horde mode was removed. And in general, I'm just going to stop talking about Judgment there. I was not very liking to that one, so I didn't touch it, which is ironic because I believe this month, April of 2015, is actually Gears of War Judgment's for free on Xbox Live Gold. Now, Gears of War being one of the more flagship titles for the Xbox, of course, they weren't necessarily going to let it go easily. So they actually bought the rights. Epic Games no longer owns the rights. Most of the senior staff had left anyway, with Cliff Bleszinski, Rod Ferguson, a couple others. Unfortunately, I'm sorry guys, I can't remember their names. I remember those two, particularly also Rod Ferguson, because he's one of the lead creators for Black Tusk Studios, which is the new studio in charge of Gears of War now. And they're the ones developing the next one coming out, which no doubt we'll hear something at E3 probably, or some teasers. Now, what I would like to see with a new Gears title is everything from Gears 3. Ignore Judgment's layout and everything else. Ignore Judgment. Just take what you learned from 3 and build on that. Story-wise, the only thing I would like to see is definitely Delta Squad's done with. Stop using Delta Squad. I know this. I was active on the forums for a while. A lot of people wouldn't mind if they went to the Pendulum Wars, which is the war before, of course, or if they went with what was, because I remember now it was actually 14 years. They spent 14 years fighting the Locust. So anytime between there, they could also try to cover and use a different squad. Of course, bring back your Horde mode. Bring back pretty much all your, at least depending on the studio size. I don't know what they're working with. I hope Microsoft would staff it properly. But bring back all your multiplayer modes.
Only 2 left.
Let's see. I'm not sure I have anything else I would actually want other than maybe some little tidbits and personal wishes, like maybe multiple executions for weapons that you could slot in the customization area of the game. Because if you went on the forums, people went crazy with thoughts of executions. It was cool. But then it made you really question whether or not we're all psychotic or not on the inside. But I have a bit of faith, putting a bit of faith in Black Tusk and Rod and all them over there. So hopefully they come out with a great game. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Talk about Gears in the comments. I'll try to, interact with you and all that. I try to. I'm usually very busy. / I'm terrible with my time management. So, as always, you're welcome to come back over to GamingHouse for more gameplay and commentary.